took a couple hostages in an apartment complex in Anchorage. I was called out as the negotiator to negotiate with him. And really, that was, you know, I remember that greatly because that's a chess match with a serial killer mentally, because I need to get those two victims out safely. And then we also need to arrest him. So there's not much room for a mistake.
Welcome to the Cops and Riders podcast. Your host, Sergeant Patrick O'Donnell, worked the streets in one of the nation's largest police departments for over 25 years. Ride along with O'Donnell and his expert guests as they help you navigate the oftentimes confusing and misunderstood world of law enforcement. O'Donnell and his guests on this show do not represent any law enforcement agency. The content of this show is not meant to be legal advice. You think you need a lawyer? You probably do.
Hey, Cops and Writers, thanks for being here with us today for another episode of the Cops and Writers podcast. I'm Patrick O'Donnell, and I'll be your host for today's show. This show is listener supported, so thanks to all of you who keep the show going. I would especially like to thank those of you who are patrons of the show. Your generosity helps pay for the software, equipment, and my time producing this show. Yes, you too can become a patron for less than a cup of coffee or a pint of Guinness. Just go over to patreon.com/Cops and Writers. If you're interested in actually seeing these interviews, head on over to Cops and Writers. Hey everyone, today we're going north, way north, to the last frontier, Anchorage, Alaska, with author and retired Anchorage police officer Doug Fifer. And we are getting kinky. Doug Fifer is a retired Alaskan police officer who specialized in crime scene analysis, deviant sexual crimes, hostage negotiations, and various special assignments throughout his 25-year career. As a highly decorated investigator, Doug has negotiated with serial killers, solved homicides, and worked real-life cases that will shock you to the core. Doug is also the author of the bestselling book, 50 Shades of True Crime, Sex, Drugs, and Killer Kink. I thought I've been there and seen it all after 25 years as a big city cop. After this interview, I realized that I haven't. Please enjoy my conversation with Doug Fifer. Doug Fifer, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, let's start out with how I usually start out with is, how did all this police stuff start for you? When did you get bit by the police bug?
I was in my early 20s and all of us need a job, a career, something to do. And I remember going back to the East Coast for a baseball game with my dad. Summertime, Alaskans, we travel back to see family. And we were able to watch a Baltimore Orioles game. Went there was a night game, and I met this state trooper that let us in the back. He thought being Alaskans was pretty cool. So he
Okay.
kind of gave us a private entrance to go watch a few of the innings of the game. But
Oh,
I
wow.
remember looking at him. I thought he was so cool in this uniform, kind of like a superhero to me as a kid. So that always stuck with me. And then when I got older and I needed a career, I was like, let me try law enforcement. It looks interesting. It always changes. Let me give that a go. And I absolutely loved it.
So you were born and raised in Anchorage?
I was born in Homer, which is about 260 miles south of Anchorage.
Oh,
Very
okay.
small town, about 5,000 people. But then moved to Anchorage, grew up there, and was employed there for my career.
Okay. Did you go to college?
I did. I went to Wayland Baptist, a Baptist university.
Was in Anchorage as well, or where
They
was
have a
that?
chapter in Alaska as well. Yeah.
Oh, they
They're
do.
based out of Texas.
Okay, so you're Alaska by heart. You're that's where you're from, and that's where you spend most of your time still, right?
Yeah, I'm as real of Alaskan as it gets for sure.
Okay. All right. Now, when you were growing up, what were your influences? What do you think was your deepest influences?
Gosh, I'd have to go back to my parents just because, you're with them every day. They raise you. So my parents were, they wanted you to go to school, be responsible, be respectful, So I always learned that growing up. And so I think that was very powerful because, they guide you each and every day, kind of keep you on that right path. And so I always look back on that. It's probably the most influential was your parents.
Okay. Now, what do they do for a living?
Well, dad was former military, the Air Force. He retired out of that and he became a civil engineer, but still worked on our base in Anchorage. And back then it was called Elmendorf. It's called J Bear. It's Joint Base now, but it was Elmendorf Air Force Base. Then he retired as a civil servant many years later. And then my mom worked in the retail industry for many, many years.
Okay. Did you have any relatives that were police officers or in law enforcement?
No, as far as I know in my family's history, I'm the first of its kind being a cop. So I was the first one.
Okay. Now, what did your mom and or dad say when it's like, "Hey, mom and dad, I want to be a cop. I'm going to go do the police thing." What was their
Yeah,
reaction?
I think they were happy. I mean, they're always hesitant, be careful and keep yourself safe, but I think they were very happy. It was a new career profession for our side of the family. Uh, Anchorage is a very close-knit community. It's not that you know everybody in town, but you know most everybody. So it's kind of a cool thing to work for the Anchorage Police Department. So I think they were very proud. They didn't know much about policing, but they were more than happy for me to go into that profession.
Now, educate me a little bit here. Now, the city of Anchorage is about how big?
330,000 people.
Okay, okay. That's pretty big. So about 330,000. And how big was the department when you were on it? Like about how many members?
Department ranges from still the same today, about 350 to 400 officers. They would
Oh,
like to have 450, but as we all know, it's very difficult to recruit police and keep a full team together.
yeah, absolutely. So you finished college. Did you go into law enforcement right away, or did you have jobs in between?
I had some jobs, I worked in real estate, odd jobs here or there, loss prevention, whatever I could get. I mean, you gotta work to be able to feed yourself. So I
Right.
was working multiple jobs before I applied for the academy. And back then, it was an extraordinary job, an opportunity. You got paid in the academy, so you just started off in law enforcement and extremely exciting. Again, I did my full 25 years in Anchorage, but really loved every minute of it.
Now, the Anchorage PD, do they have their own academy, or is it like a technical college kind of like situation, or what did that look like?
Yeah, it's a full-blown academy. They have their own. As a
Okay.
matter of fact, they would often host other agencies
Mm,
throughout our state in the academy to certify them as well. But as a new recruit, you'll go to school. It's like a school setting like college for 4 months. You'll learn everything, defensive tactics, firearms, codes, laws, all the things that you need to know as a cop. 4 months, multiple testing. You've got to graduate out of the academy. And then, as you know, you go into field training, and that's where you're, set up with another officer, a senior officer for a month at a time. And we did that. You'd have three of them, so 3 months. And then you have a final phase where you have one more field training officer that dresses in civilian clothes, and then you're still in your uniform. And then you just handle the job by yourself for 2 weeks, and they evaluate you to make sure that you're doing the job properly, you're handling reports, all that. And then they cut you loose, they sign off, and then you're on your own as a cop.
Now, that's very interesting to me. I've never heard of an FTO going into street clothes while their recruit is in their uniform. Why are they doing that?
Well, it's actually a great reason they do it is because the final 2 weeks is, as you know, in law enforcement, anytime somebody's in a uniform, people in crisis will run to that police
Oh,
officer, and they
absolutely.
should because they need help. So what that does is it prevents the field training officer from getting fully involved in these calls, so he or she can evaluate that recruit properly. Now, if the shit hits the fan, everybody's got to be in there, and they're going to
Right.
help, of course. But it's a great way for them to evaluate and for people to focus on the police officer that's being rated to make sure that they can handle whatever situation. So it works very well. Every once in a while, there's an extreme call where everybody's got to be involved, and that happens. But for the most part, it worked out very well.
Wow, that's I've never heard of that before. But thinking about it, it's like it doesn't cost any extra, and it is definitely gonna have a different kind of, there's gonna be different kind of pressure on that recruit. Because like you said, people just run to the uniform. They see, like a
It,
marked squad, they see a uniform, that's an automatic. So, boy, you're almost like a fly on the wall, watching your recruit do their thing.
That's what you are. You really want to make sure that in that final 2 weeks, they can do the job. I mean, there's immense responsibility being in law enforcement. There's
Right.
liability for the city or the state. So you've got to be pretty spot on and make sure that individual's good to go. I did that for many years as a field training officer. So
Okay.
I would train them up both in uniform and then in plain clothes. I found my evaluation was much better in plain clothes because, as we've talked about, that officer, they had to handle the situation. And basically, citizens would leave me alone and focus on them. So evaluation wise, it's a very, very good tactic.
Did you ever have a citizen saying, "You're not a real cop. Come on now."
In when I was out of uniform,
Yes.
oh yeah, yeah, that happened all the. And even when you work, sometimes you work undercover assignments or
Oh, sure.
detail. They would do the same thing, and then depending on what you were in, you would either show them your badge or you wouldn't. You just play it off. But
Yep.
that happened all the time.
That's funny. Oh my gosh. That is something that, like I said, that's genius almost, I think. Like I said, it doesn't cost your department a penny, and it just you're looking through a completely different lens, and it's putting different pressure on that recruit that they wouldn't have before. And yeah, that's really slick. How long have they been doing that? I'm excited about that. That's really cool.
Boy, I served 25 years and retired in 21, so they've been doing it that entire time. So long before
Wow.
my time.
I'll be darned. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea. So what was the
Yep.
hiring process like for the department? You got on in 96? Is that when you got on?
96. Boy, it was a tough hiring process, I'll tell you that. There was about 5,500 applicants for a 28 person academy. So one, you have a huge pool, and back in the day, it was a great job. It's almost like a government job. You have pension,
Yep.
so these are really sought after jobs. And what they do, they whittle down from that 5,500 to 28 individuals to offer them the academy. But again, you're going to go through written tests before you get there. You're going to go through psychological tests. You're going to do a polygraph. You're going to do a physical fitness test. You're going to be checked out by a doctor. So there's 5 or 6 big testing phases that you'll go through. And all along, they eliminate candidates through that. So it might go down to 3,500, might go down to 2,000, 1,500, 1,000. And then the last remaining 50-ish that are who they have selected, it goes to the chief of police. And
Mm.
then they'll kind of go through and pick the candidates that they think would do the best. And then you're in the academy.
Wow. I would think, what you just said at the very end, where the chief gets to handpick who, they want. Boy, I think you just open yourself up to litigation because, somebody's going to scream. It's like, you didn't pick me because of X, Y, or Z. Prove it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one, but I think when you have like let's say you have 50 qualified people and you've got to get it down to 28, then the chief can go through, and I say the chief, he's probably with his captains and
Right.
deputy chief, but they can go through and really focus on, who's got the top education, who did the best in the academy, who was strong here. That's probably how they eliminate. I was never in that process. And also those candidates are then reinvited to the subsequent academy. Like if we had another one in 8 months,
Mm.
those that were left over are going to be in line for that, which happened a lot. We would pick those up in the later academy.
Gotcha. Yeah, for us, our academy size was 60 people. It's not there anymore. They're
That's
having
big.
a-
That's a big
they're ha-
one.
they're having a hard time just getting like 20, 30 people in an academy class now. And for me it was 95 and I was on a waiting list for 4 years. I took the test when I was
Wow.
26. I went through all the testing when I was 26, didn't get on until I was 30. And I'm like, ugh. In the year that I went through the academy, we pushed 4 academies through in 1 year.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and I'm just having flashbacks to what you're saying is like, 5, 6,000 people. Same with us. I took the written test. There was probably 2,500, 3,000 people at the written. There's like 2 or 3 of those in one day. And that was for like, I don't know, 2 or 300 positions. So yeah, the competition was fierce, but the economy wasn't great. It was a decent job. You wouldn't get rich, but you could raise a family on it and live halfway comfortable, and you had a pension and
Yep.
great health insurance. Of course there was negatives to it too, but that's with any job, but there were some serious negatives with that. So
Yeah.
one thing that I saw when I was looking at Alaska is Alaska has the highest percentage of serial killers per capita of anywhere else. Why do you think this is so?
Well, I tell people, especially some history of Alaska in my book, I said it's one of the most beautiful places, but also one of the most deadly. I don't have a perfect answer as to why that is with serial killers, but I think one, we attract a lot of serial killers from the lower 48 that come up to Alaska because it's a massive state. It's 2.5 times the size of Texas. Uh, you have a lot of land, low population. The entire state is in the 700,000 range. So very small population. So serial killers, I think, naturally think that they can come up, they, kill somebody, they have ample areas to dispose of the bodies. That's typically how you get caught is we find a body or you have
Mm,
witnesses. So in their mind, I think they can probably get away with a little bit more. We do have some homegrown serial killers, just as everybody else does around the nation. But
right.
we have a lot of trans serial killers that come up and commit their crimes. Also, probably thinking incorrectly that law enforcement in Alaska isn't sophisticated, that you don't have big
Mm.
departments. That's just opposite. APD is a very sophisticated department. You have the Alaska State Troopers, so you're going to get caught. And eventually, we would catch these serial killers. But it was always fascinating. I don't have an exact answer, but it's probably because they thought they could get away with it.
Well, I was very surprised to see that Anchorage has a pretty high crime rate. I didn't think a whole lot was going on up there, but I was completely wrong. I mean, do you have any ideas as far as like what the violent crime rate was when you were working?
Tops in the nation, it still is for Anchorage. And what I
Yeah.
would say on that is you've got 8 months of winter, and it can be very cold, a ton of snow. So people unfortunately get the cabin fever. They get locked up in their apartments, their houses, unless you're an extreme, sports fanatic that snow machines or skis at 20 below. Often that 8 months is tough with darkness, kind of being trapped in a house. Alcoholism is huge, drugs. So combine all those, and then you get violence, right? You get a lot of domestic violence in
Sure.
households because people are stuck together, families are. So that was one of the biggest things I learned is domestic violence is rampant in Anchorage, but I think it's climate induced. I really think it is. And alcohol and drugs obviously don't help.
What was like when I was a new cop and up until about 2017 or 18, crack cocaine was like the drug of choice, for the hardcore. Yeah, and now towards the end of my career, it's kind of segued towards heroin, fentanyl. You'll always have pills, but and there'll always be crack as well. What was the drugs of choice up by you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Crack cocaine always fascinated me because early in my career, that was the big drug.
Oh yeah.
But one drug that lasts the span of time is heroin. So when I started, heroin was very prevalent.
Wow.
In my mid-career, heroin was prevalent. And when I retired, is still prevalent. So I think heroin is the drug that kind of like a retro drug that just lasts, the span of time. Crack cocaine was interesting to me is I thought there'd never be another drug that could overtake crack because it was, I mean, wreaking havoc on our town.
Right.
But there was something else came up, out a new drug. Fentanyl's in the mix now, but crack cocaine actually came back and is currently an issue in Alaska as well. How it ever came back, I'm not really sure, but
Yeah.
it's quite odd to me because I thought typically once a drug disappears, something else replaces it. Fentanyl is a big one now, but synthetic dope, there'll be something else next year or the year after that replaces it. I don't think you ever stop it. The drug trade, early in my career, I thought I could put a dent in it. Later in my career, I realized it's almost an unstoppable force. That's how much money and power are in dope.
Yeah. Now, speaking of crack, I'm sure prostitution is rampant as well because where you have drug addiction like that, you're going to have prostitutes because that's how they feed, their habit. What gangs, or are there like organized gangs up there?
We used to have quasi-organized gangs. We used to have the Hells Angels, things like that, and they did, dope. They did burglaries, thefts, things like that.
Yeah.
But really, I think organized crimes or gangs in Alaska have been pretty much dissolved. I mean, we put a lot of effort and force into it. I'm not saying that they don't come around once in a while and there's some disjointed gangs out there, but really there is no gangs per se in Anchorage or Alaska that are dominating committing crimes. Again, it's a small town, so we're very good at putting resources and either arresting those individuals or breaking apart those gangs.
Yeah.
You used to have a lot of lower 48 action that would try and come up and establish gangs, but
Sure.
we were able to kind of fend that off and use law enforcement to break them up. So not a huge gang problem, which is fortunate.
Yeah. I just think to myself, Hell's Angels, are they on snowmobiles? We call them snowmobiles down here. Yeah. There's snow machines up by you because you're only riding a motorcycle maybe 3 months out of the year, I would imagine there.
Yeah, they've got a chapter in Anchorage and Fairbanks. And again, for your listeners, Fairbanks can get 40 or 50 below in the winter. I mean, that's brutal cold.
Oh,
So you got a short summertime area. The Hells Angels back in the day had a little more force, meaning they would arrange some homicides and bring other Hells Angels up from different states, commit those homicides on other, you know, factions that dealt drugs or whatever their
sure.
enemies were, and they would leave. Those crimes are very difficult for us to solve because if you don't have witnesses, you don't know somebody, you fly in, you fly out, commit a homicide, sometimes without evidence, it's going to be very difficult to solve. So I have no doubt some of our, unsolved homicides are Hells Angels affiliated, but back more towards the 80s and 90s. After that, they pretty much dissolved.
That's so interesting to me. Wow. So as far as the drug trade and all that, who's running it? Or just like smaller factions that are doing that, or how does that work?
Yeah, during my time, you would have a lot of these Dominicans would come in selling cocaine.
Hmm.
You would have a lot that would come into the States, set up shop, start selling. We'd work with the FBI, DEA, break, bust them, put them in jail. Somebody else would come to replace them. So really,
Sure.
it's not a set group that sells it all the time, but similar to the lower 48, wherever anybody else is setting up, they're going to try Alaska until they get busted. But again, it's a pretty close-knit community, so it's not like New York City where you've got a ton of people in an area and you can kind of manipulate. Anchorage, not that you can't get away with it, but I think it's a little more difficult.
Yeah, interesting. Now, did you work the street for the entirety of your career?
A large majority of it, other than special units, I work the streets, but I absolutely love the streets because there's no adrenaline rush like it.
Yeah.
So you go out and really you never know what you're going to get for that day. And so I just enjoyed that so much. It was hard to break that. But I did a lot of special units like hostage negotiator, crime scene response team. I might take several years in that specialty, working it, go back to the streets, go do something else.
Hmm.
Anchorage was very good at allowing you to kind of cross train and develop different skills as a cop. So I love that. I like doing different things maybe every 4 years to kind of up my game.
Yeah. No, that makes you a well-rounded officer, I believe. I think that every cop should do their stint in the detective bureau. You should learn how to write a warrant. You should learn how to, dissect a crime, develop your leads, go arrest the bad guy, interrogation, interview, et cetera, et cetera. It just makes you a more well-rounded cop to learn all these different skills.
Yeah, I think so. And 50% of being a great cop is that intuition when you've got a
Yes.
suspect in front of you, that feel. It's almost like a sixth sense where you
Yes.
know if they're related or not. That really helps your investigation. I don't know, that part is hard to teach from a recruit level. I learned that. You can learn all the paperwork, the warrants, things like that. But the best cops I found had that inherent ability to just naturally almost sense when somebody was a suspect and if they were involved. And it saved a lot of time and effort. Were they always right? No, but a majority of the time they were. I found those to be the best cops.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, was there something that surprised you about the job? Like when you first hit the street and you were a newer cop, is like, wow, I didn't think that happened.
Yeah, I go back to the drug trade because when I was a new cop, we had an area in Anchorage that we had drug peddlers. They'd stand on the street corner. Back then, they were selling heroin. So I thought that I would, arrest these guys. And I was even on patrol then in a uniform. But one of the guys was selling heroin on the corner. So I parked down the street, snuck around this building and watched him. And finally, there was this deal done with a car. So I went hauling ass to tackle him. He went running, but I had the head start. I tackled him. And back in the day, they would keep heroin in their mouth. It was wrapped in aluminum foil.
Aluminum foil,
So if
yep.
the cops got him, they would swallow it and then throw it up after, because we had to have the drugs to arrest them. They would throw it up afterwards. Or if you arrested them and they went to jail, they'd pass it through their bowels. And
Ugh,
then foil doesn't dissolve, so they still have their heroin.
right.
Uh, that's why, yeah, drug dealing. I mean, I'm fascinating. But I
Hmm.
was able to tackle this guy. He had swallowed the heroin, so I was kind of upset because I needed the drugs. But in the melee, he was fighting, so I used pepper spray. And then after I handcuffed him, back in the day, we take a bottle of water and we dump it over their face to get
Right.
the pepper spray out
Yep.
because it burns, it hurts. But he started throwing up. But the benefit here was he actually threw up the heroin packets. Yeah, which was great. So I had a criminal charge. I could charge him with heroin, and it
Yeah.
was almost like Christmas came for a young cop, right? So then on the forms back then, I we had asked what tattoos you had.
Right.
So he said, I have a tattoo on my back. So I said, what is it? He said, it's a prison tat of a woman. Now I was very new at the time, so I didn't know what that meant. So I asked him, is it your girlfriend? Is it your mom? Because I don't know what the hell it is. He said,
Right.
it's a prison. Then he started calling me a rookie and saying I was green. I didn't know what I was doing. So I told him, I said, well, you're going to jail, so I know a little bit of what I'm doing because I'm not going to jail.
Yeah.
So we got to the jail, and I had the jail or correction officer, which are much different in Alaska. They have a lot of leeway in searching somebody or checking them. I
Mm,
said, there's a tattoo, but he won't tell me what it is. I got to put it in the report. So the jailer had him stripped down naked. And in jail, he just did that because you don't mess around in a correctional facility.
right.
But on his back was a beautiful tattoo of a woman. Subsequently, I learned that he was tattooed in prison and then
Ugh.
turned out as a prison prostitute by the
Ugh.
Mexican mafia in San Francisco. And then thus he had his heroin habit that in Anchorage he was trying to
Mm,
solve. So that moment was the light bulb in my career on the depths of what humanity could go to because pre that, I would have never fathomed that an individual could be that low for dope to get tattooed on his back and then turn tricks in a male prison. But that's exactly what happened to this individual. He was probably in his mid 20s, younger kid,
yeah.
but it always fascinated me. I thought he needed a stint in rehab rather than jail because his life story was horrific. I
Yeah.
never knew what happened to him afterwards. I have no doubt that he probably didn't survive very long with that type of habit. But that was a real turning point that opened my eyes because not that I was naive, but I was a little naive to humanity.
We
But
all
after
were.
that,
Yeah,
yeah, after
absolutely.
that,
We all were.
my eyes were wide open after that.
Man, so this guy, he's in prison in or jail in San Francisco, and he went in as a heroin addict, or did he get hooked when he was in prison? Do you know?
Yeah, I absolutely know because I interviewed him on his life
Okay.
story, which was kind of so when he was 15, he did heroin with some of his friends in high school.
Oh
Somebody
God.
had, and he said 6 months later, he had almost stolen everything out of his parents' house.
My
And then a
Lord.
few months after that, his parents kicked him out. He was a juvenile. So then he went to unsavory acts in the streets. I took his prostitution because he had to feed his habit.
Yeah.
And then he went to selling heroin. He was popped 3 times. That was back on kind of the three strikes you're out.
Yeah. Okay.
And then put in San Quentin for a real sentence. I think he got 10 years. And San Quentin's real time. That's not fun time.
Right.
He went in there, the Mexican mafia, which for your listeners, they control the prison system, especially in California. You might ask, how can that happen? Believe me, it happens. They offered him heroin. He didn't have any money, but they gave it to him anyway with the ability to pay it
Oh.
back. When he couldn't, they offered him two choices. They would literally beat him to death, or he could be a prison prostitute. They had a Mexican mafia member that painstakingly tattooed this female on his back. You can see the image in the book
Oh.
to see how realistic this was. But it was the most incredible tattoo I've ever seen. And then they would pimp him out in prison, and keep him on heroin. So that's how he survived his heroin habit. Now, how you get heroin in a prison 24/7
Right.
fascinates me, but they still do it to this day. They somehow cannot stop the drug trade, even in a lockdown facility. So that was his story. I felt bad for him. They had then placed him in Alaska to obviously sell dope, and so he was feeding his own habit by selling heroin on the streets.
Damn. Wow. That I remember seeing that, or I listened to the audio portion of the book. I bought the audio book, which I absolutely loved. And I was just like, holy, I still remember I was in the gym, I was working out, and I'm just like, holy shit, this is crazy, man. It just, what a powerful drug that would turn somebody into that. It just,
Yeah, he
oh,
he did say he would rather die than go without heroin. That's how prolific the drug was in his life, which just fascinated me. Again, I don't know what rock bottom is, but that's pretty much rock bottom.
yeah,
And he still couldn't work his way out of it. And again, I don't know what happened to him. It
yeah.
probably wasn't good with that big of a heroin habit.
No, I'm sure there wasn't a Hallmark ending to this. They're not gonna make a Hallmark movie about his life.
That
But
was it was brutal.
anyways, I was, of course, being a cop for 25 years, I think about all different kinds of stuff when it comes to police work. And one is equipment. I know it might sound a little boring, but Alaska weather is not forgiving. What precautions did you take not to get frostbite or, just to kind of protect yourself, but also be able to manipulate your equipment? That was always the trade-off. It's like, yeah, you could have nice big furry gloves, but you can't manipulate your handcuffs or your pepper spray or God forbid your gun. So how did you swing that?
It's a great question, and it's painful. I'll say that I don't think you ever escape frostbite. I think every cop gets a little bit of it in Alaska. Just inevitable, you're going to be on some scene, something where you've got to post up outside,
Oh,
shooting incident, and you're kind of screwed. I remember one call, it was a negotiation where it was face to face, and the guy had a hostage and a knife to his throat, to her throat. We ended up separating her, but then he still had the knife on his throat on the front porch. So I was face to face. We had SWAT set up. I had a fence in front of me, so I was safe. But it turned into hours outside. I wasn't prepared. I didn't have
oh,
gloves. And then when
oh,
that incident was finally over, I couldn't even manipulate my fingers, meaning I couldn't even open up my car with a key because my
oh,
fingers were frostbitten and my toes. Those type of situations, gosh, what would have been better is to sub me out with another negotiator. But
yes,
when you get that rapport and you're in the moment, it's
right,
so difficult to separate because you're gaining ground here. You don't want to leave as a negotiator. Manipulating like your rifles, your handguns, we always try and find thin gloves, but the problem with thin gloves is they don't protect you in the weather. So
right,
there really is no great way to do it because and what you do is you cycle gloves on and off. If you're set up with a firearm, for a possible shoot scenario, you cycle your gloves on and off, on and off. You might have heat packs that you break open, put in your gloves, just in your hands to keep them as warm as possible. But I found, manipulating firearms is very difficult with gloves. We did it in training scenarios, and your marksmanship goes way down, obviously,
oh,
because
obviously, yeah.
got this glove on, you don't have the trigger feel, you're not as steady. So it's brutal. We do have hats, gloves, snow pants. We have heavy, heavy gear. So maybe you're on an accident scene or something where you can dress up. You're not in a, life or death situation at that point. We have gear that we suit up and then you can last out in 20 below for a while. But long term, it's never fun. And I think probably every Alaska cop has some frostbite story in their career.
I would think so. I mean, Wisconsin gets mighty cold. We go into the negative numbers, and I worked nights for 17 years, which just, it is colder, but it just feels so much colder when there's no sunshine. So I can only imagine, because how many months do you go with no sunshine up there?
Yeah, we get about 8 months of winter, but Anchorage is a little bit better. In the max winter time, you get about 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours of light. If you
Okay.
go further north, like Ukqiavik and Fairbanks, up there, they get less and less. As a matter of
Oh,
fact, our northernmost city, the sun sets in November. It doesn't come back up till late January. So they're in total darkness for a couple months, which is insane.
oh my
Anchorage
God.
isn't quite that bad, but it's not light all day. And if you work indoors, you might go to work in the morning, and when you go home at night, it's dark. So you're really never seeing any light. Cops have it a little bit better because we're out in the community, so you get that light, which I think is important.
Yes, I think so too. I mean, I just think back to name the situation where you're posted up on a house, there's somebody inside, and it's like, well, do we call the SWAT team? Maybe they'll come, maybe they won't, blah blah. You got your gun in your hand, and within like 5, 6, 7 minutes, you're like, I don't know if I could even pull this trigger if I have to, because you're so
Yeah,
freaking cold. Oh my
yeah, I think that
gosh.
happens, no doubt. Yeah,
Now, how did you keep your cars
the hand
from,
warmers.
how did you keep your squads from not freezing up?
The squad cars we leave running.
Okay.
So typically, you're going to in Anchorage, they just run all the time. And two things: one, the equipment's important. You got computers, you got
Yep.
AEDs, all your equipment. You got to keep it warm. So pretty much, you just leave it running at a constant temp. That also helps. You don't want your car to freeze up, get stuck on
Right.
the ice, have tires melt down. Cold can bring some interesting things to police work, as you mentioned. Fairbanks, especially Fairbanks police. I mean, I can't imagine working in that cold of temperatures. I mean, that's brutal. You could get frostbite within minutes.
Yes.
Anchorage, we're on the coast, so a little bit warmer, always better. Not warm by any stretch of the means, but warmer. So I think we benefited from that. But boy, I always thought about the interior cops. I don't think I could have done that. It was too cold.
Damn. Yeah, my hat's off to him because, like you mentioned, it's like, what, there could be like a low priority thing like a car accident or something like that, but anything can happen at any time, and you have to be able to get to the bat belt and do what you got to
Yep.
do. You know, that's just, yeah, it just sucks. There's no nice way of going around that, man. Just, oh,
There's still no perfect fix. It is what it
oh,
is. It's brutal.
yeah, it is. Yikes. So, what were some of the most notable crimes you investigated? What was like common? You said domestic violence was pretty common. What other crimes, or what was there something that kind of stuck out in your head, that was like most notable crimes?
Yeah, you've got domestic violence. We had a lot of bank robberies back when I worked. You had a lot
Hmm.
of theft rings that went around, a lot of burglaries, some professional crews, some obviously not professional crews, drug related. So that made up a majority of the crime. As far as crimes that I will always remember, probably dealt with the serial killers that I was part of the investigation or team. One was Joshua Wade. He was one of our serial killers, probably good for up to 14, 15 victims. We'll never know.
Wow.
Joshua Wade died in a prison recently, but never gave up fully how many individuals that he killed. But that was one where he was on the run from the Anchorage Police Department for many, many, many months. We couldn't find him. Eventually, there was a chase. He took a couple hostages in an apartment complex in Anchorage. I was called out as the negotiator to negotiate with him. And really, that was, you know, I remember that greatly because that's a chess match with a serial killer mentally, because I need to get those two victims out safely.
Yeah.
And then we also need to arrest him. So there's not much room for a mistake, especially in that scenario as a negotiator. Very mentally taxing. I always remembered on my large negotiations when they were finished, when we got the suspect out, I'd always have this mental dump, and I was so exhausted because I didn't realize how invested I was speaking with
Mhm.
this individual and how tired I was post that. So physically and mentally, it just completely drains you. So I always found that interesting. But hostage negotiations were always my most memorable. Our team was very, very good. I would say 95% of the call outs went positively. Can never be perfect. We had some that didn't go well. But again, it's a great tool to have a team to come out, diffuse the situation, talk to those individuals, get them out safely, and then go on to the next one. So that was my favorite and probably the most influential of my police career was hostage negotiations.
Okay. I love the hostage negotiation stuff. I think it's fascinating. And I've done it. I've talked, and not just hostage, but like trying to talk somebody off a bridge. We did something like that, or yeah, I had a guy that had a big old butcher knife to his chest, and we're trying to talk him out of it. He's gonna kill himself, and he actually plunged it into his chest. There was like a circle of his cops. The tactically it was a horrible situation. We shouldn't have been doing what we were doing. We were way too close to this guy, and he plunges the knife in his chest, and he starts running, and we all looked at each other like, did that just happen? And then he
Yeah.
made it like a half a block, and then he went down, and they actually saved him. And then a year later, in the same district but different location, same dude with the knife, a different knife, obviously. And I looked at him and I said, and I just whispered to him, I said, "Do you remember how much that hurt last time?" I said, "Stay tuned, buddy. That's what's coming." And he looked at me and says, "Fuck this." And he just threw the knife on the ground. I'm just like,
Did
whew.
that worked? Yeah.
Yeah, but as far as hostage, yeah, I've like I said, I've had like real ones too. And what do you think are like the best practices, the do's and don'ts if you're the negotiator? What are you going to try to do to have
Yeah.
a peaceful resolution to that?
Yeah. What I like to relate it to is with your family, with your spouse, your partner, with whoever you have. Kind of like when you get in arguments, when you talk, you can use negotiations. It's the same whether it's business, personal life, or law
Yep.
enforcement. I found that to be true. So it doesn't matter where you use it, it's all the same. But you really build rapport. And the way you build rapport is if I'm talking to you, I'm learning about you. Typically a crime, I won't even get into crime initially. If you had hostages, it might be different. I'd be quicker on it. But let's say I was interviewing you on a murder charge. I'd want to know about your friends, family, do you own cats or dogs? Just to establish that pre. So we're just talking. We're just gabbing back and forth to lower your guard a little bit, to build that rapport. Really important. I would also repeat back what you said to me. We call that mirroring.
Hmm.
And the reason that's important is because it clicks in the human brain that, oh, I want to know about your friends, family, your do you own cats or dogs? Just to establish that pre. So we're just talking. We're just gabbing back and forth to lower your guard a little bit, to build that rapport. Really important. I would also repeat back what you said to me. We call that mirroring. oh, Doug's listening to me. He's understanding what I'm saying. Whether I am or not, in their minds, they believe it. So we use that a lot, right? With serial killers, especially Josh Wade, I used ego. Serial killers love ego. They want to be the best serial killer on planet Earth. They're psychopaths or sociopaths, so they don't have feelings like we would. They just get off on adrenaline on being a great killer. So you'll compliment them on being a great killer. It seems counterintuitive that a cop would do that. And it feels kind of icky in the situation because you
Right.
don't want to be doing it. Ultimately, you get them to admit to these crimes. They can't help themselves. They want to boast about it, be cool, and say, I did this. Look how great I did it. And we solved a lot that way. So really, it's the rapport, no matter what, whether it's family, business, or police work, a little bit of rapport. Make sure they hear that you're listening, and that's by repeating back. We do hooks and triggers. So if you had an ex-girlfriend that you hated and it amped you up and you got pissed, I would call that a trigger. I'd leave it alone. But if you loved your dog a ton, I'm going to talk a lot about your dog,
Hmm.
even if you're a murder suspect, because that's a hook. If you loved your family, I talk a lot about your family because that's a hook to negotiators. So we have intel officers that also will research your entire background
Right.
and they'll feed me on hook triggers. So I might talk to you about something that you'd be surprised that I knew about. That's because in the background we're researching that in live time.
Now, when you're watching TV, obviously any police show, is 99% bogus. But as far as hostage negotiations go, what when you're looking, you're like, oh man, we'd never do that. What are some of the stuff that would like jump out at you?
Yeah, a lot of it is when people want suspects want a helicopter, a plane, a bus, cops get away. That's really unrealistic. You'll see that in some of the movies or documentaries. What we always did is a suspect would ask me, I want a helicopter. I don't want to go to prison. So whatever that individual's name was, we always use their first name.
Sure.
So if it was Josh for the serial killer, I'd be like, Josh, you know that's unreasonable. You know I can't do that. That's never going to happen. What does two things. You're brutally honest with the individual. They already know that likely that helicopter is not coming, going to swoop them in and they're going to go away safely. So it resets. What I don't like is when you feed into that fantasy and you say, well, let's see if we can get a helicopter. We'll see if we can do this. Because what that does, it destroys trust down the line.
Gotcha.
So really, you see that in TV that they're helping and it's working towards a solution. That would be the opposite in real life negotiations. You want to be very honest on expectations. The serial killer that I talked out, he asked me, am I going to go to prison forever? Now, I didn't lie, but what I said is, Josh, you're going to have to answer for your crimes, and that's going to come after you come out, and we'll see what happens. If I would have said, no, you're not going to go to prison, he would know I'm lying, and he could very easily kill another hostage. But he respected that answer.
Sure.
So I dumbed it down a little bit. So I'm not saying you're going to be in prison for life, which he was. But you want to do those type of things and keep that rapport going. But again, being very honest with them is key. It seems like you should be able to lie to them, but there's a couple things. It's very hard to remember all your lies. So they're going to trip you up later.
Oh,
So
sure.
just be honest and straightforward. And it usually works out the best. I taught new negotiators. That was the first thing I taught them is it's extremely rare, only one incident in my career where we were dishonest in a negotiation for an outcome because that the person was actively harming people. We had to be.
Mm.
But 99% of the time, honesty works.
Yeah, I remember reading a book before I was a cop about a hostage negotiator in Chicago. And he was talking about some of the fallacies where it was like, well, we're going to bring in the priest. And actually, somebody did that when he was doing a negotiation. He didn't know that this was going to happen. And all of a sudden, this guy is, barricaded, blah, 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 with a gun. And he brings in a priest and he's like, Father, I'm a sinner, blah, blah. And the priest is like, Son, God forgives all sins. And they're like, oh, he does? And blows his brains out because he felt absolution
Yeah.
from this
Yep.
priest, so don't bring in the priest. Or it's like bring in the wife or the girlfriend. It's like, well, she might be the reason why he's doing this shit. You just don't blindly bring people in, and that's just dumb.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. In my career, I had many requests for the ex-wife, the current wife, the girlfriend,
Yep.
mom or dad to come in. And that's an absolute no, because one, you're jeopardizing that citizen, right? That family member.
Right.
The second would be, can I talk to him on the phone? People might think, well, that's great. Let's let them do that. But to your point, oftentimes they'll talk on the phone, then they'll blow their heads off or they'll
Yeah.
harm somebody else because they wanted to scream or get one final act of vengeance.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
what we would do to easy solve for that, and this is all we did. So if you want to talk to your wife, your girlfriend, because you love her so much and just let me talk to her for 10 minutes and I'll come out. I would have a negotiator go and do an actual interview on tape
Yep.
with that spouse. I would come back. It would be choreographed. We would, the spouse couldn't yell at the individual or anything like that.
Right.
I love you. You come out, we'll work this through. And then I would play it live for them, either on, the phone or
Mm.
or if we had a robot in there or something to play for them and let them listen that way. They would never have individual contact with anybody because a lot of the times they're going to kill themselves or somebody else, and it's kind of a moment for them to get notoriety. So it's much safer to do a tape recording. So that's how we handle that.
Yeah, and like to your point, sometimes they just to spite that person, they'll kill themselves in front of them. So you just take away that opportunity. It's like, okay, good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And it always kills me too, where the negotiator is working by himself. In a perfect world, you have a team, like you said. This it's not just one person, it takes a team to make this work correctly. And two is, they they go out from a position of cover or concealment. And
Yeah.
they're taking their vest off, they're dropping their gun on the ground, and they're walking towards the madman with a gun. I'm like, are you nuts? Hell no. So, that's just fantasy.
Yeah, that stuff never happens. I can assure you on that. Typically, our negotiator team is part of the SWAT team.
Hmm.
It's all one. So typically, you'll have your SWAT team set up in an area that you're out anywhere close to the individual. Obviously, you have snipers, so any movements, you're pretty well protected. Face to face happens in Alaska more than you think.
Mm.
Other areas, most people probably have phones, cell phones,
Yep.
but we have some remote areas that you wouldn't. So unfortunately, we had a lot of face to face, which is the most dangerous. And when I say face to face, it might be, outside with a bullhorn, somebody's inside a house where we couldn't get communications
Yeah.
through a fence, something like that. But it happened. But I was always pretty key to have SWAT team members ready. If it becomes a lethal situation, I certainly want to go home at night.
Yep.
So that's the best way to do it. So we were pretty good at that.
Very good. Now, all good things come to an end. How difficult was it to retire from law enforcement?
Well, I think 25 years in any profession is a good run. And I
I think
did pretty
so
much
too.
A to Z. Yeah, A to Z in law enforcement at the Anchorage Police Department. Again, if I could only pick one thing to do in life as a profession, I would be a cop. I had the most fun, most rewarding, best time of my life. It's great to have a job that you wake up and it's not like, oh God, I gotta go to work. Like I just had, it was a great department to work for, such great coworkers and friends, throughout my career. So leaving it was okay. I'd done my time. Do I miss it? Absolutely. Like I like being out in the community, you know, kind of the old school arresting bad guys, keeping the community safe. It's
Yep.
fun. It's kind of a game. But I think 25 years is a good run. It's time for new officers to come up and do it. So while I miss it, I still support the cause. I love police officers throughout our nation. They do a ton of work. Again, the vast majority are excellent people in their profession. It's a very small percentage, but that's in every profession that you have some oddities. So again, to your listeners, if you see police out there, please thank them for the job that they do. They really do a great job in keeping your community safe. You don't see a lot of it, and that's good. Cops take care of it in the background. You work midshift for many years. I'm glad society doesn't know how bad it is out there sometimes, but
Right.
that's why you have to have law enforcement. There's a certain percentage of evil, and I hope most people never see it, but as cops, we see it, and that's why it's so important to have that enforcement.
Yeah, absolutely. So, was there an inciting incident where you're just like, man, it's time to go? Or was it just kind of pre-planned? It's like, I did my 25. I been there, done that, got the t-shirt. It's time to go.
Yeah, there was no incident. Tip
Okay.
with Alaska, you can get your pension at 20 and then you get full medical at 25. So there's really a carrot to get to 25 years. And
Absolutely.
then and then you get your pension and medical. So it's a great time to leave because you can add on a little bit if you stay, but not much. So it's a great time to leave after 25 and write a book or do something else or whatever you want. Enjoy
Absolutely.
life. Police work
And
stuff because you work a lot of hours, so it's nice
it
to get a little reprieve.
it is. And it's almost like dog years. It's not just 25 years. It's kind of like dog years where it's like extra on top of you. But the way I always looked at it was, you know what? It's a young guy's game. It ain't an old guy's game. And by old, like when you hit your 50s, boy, it's like those aches and pains are real, man. That's wearing all that
Yep.
equipment and the shift work and everything else just piled on top of you, the stress. And yeah, and you know what? And it's nice to give some young buck or gal that wants that job really bad, give them a chance. It's like you had your moment, time to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think and for your listeners, the equipment can be up to 30 pounds. You're putting that on every day. That's
Oh
a
yeah.
that's a ton of equipment that you carry. I mean, heavy flashlights, firearms, tasers, your vest. I mean, it weighs a ton. So carrying that around for a long time, it's nice to kind of be out of that, and you feel a little bit lighter for sure.
Absolutely. Now, one of the main reasons I brought you on was your book, 50 Shades of Crime, Sex, Drugs, and Killer Kink. Where did you get the idea to write this book?
Well, I think it started probably around 10 years in my career because as cops, you go to every case imaginable. And the ones that cops talk about the most are the deviant sexual cases,
Oh
just
yeah.
because they're so out of the norm and so weird. It's not that bank robbers and burglars and investigating murders, isn't interesting. It's just that these sexual deviant cases they're just far out there. So what I would do at parties or with family and friends, they'd be like, "What's the most interesting story you've ever worked or
Yep.
criminal case?" So I tell them about a bank robber or a negotiation. They'd be like, "Well,
Yeah.
what's really weird out there?" And
Yeah.
so then I go into some sex case that I worked, some sex crime, and they'd be like, "Tell me more about that. What about this? What happened here?" And they were aghast that this happened, but they wanted to know more. And so they all said you should write a book when you retire. So I kind of thought, nah, that'd be kind of a weird book. But then 20 years, when I got 20 and 25 years in, I was like, this would be a great book because so many people asked me about the sexual deviancy in Anchorage. And so what I did is I took all my stories over my career. About 80% of the actual cases I worked, 20% might be training with negotiators down in the lower
Sure.
48. Some of their stories I incorporated that are extreme, but really it covers the gamut of sexual deviancy. And these can be your bosses, your best friends, your neighbors. You never know who's involved in this. Once you read the book, you'll be quite shocked. And this doesn't just happen in Alaska, it happens everywhere in the lower 48 and in the world.
Yeah. Now, have you ever written a book before this?
Nope, that was my first book. I wanted to come out with a true crime book that was a little bit different. I could write one on serial killers, regular cases, robberies, things like that. But I thought this is a great way to establish yourself because there's really nothing like it out there on the sexual deviancy from a true crime law
Yeah.
enforcement perspective. So I wanted to break out of the box with a different style of book, something different that readers and listeners can go to and get a different feel for law enforcement that you don't hear about normally.
Yeah, I absolutely love the book. I bought the audio version and I loved it. The narrator did a great job. It keeps you definitely want to know what's going to happen next or what the next story is going to be. It's very compelling and it keeps your attention. And that as an author, that's what you want. You want people, thinking, "Hey, I want to read the next story. I wonder what happened," et cetera. So bravo to you. You did a great job with it. I absolutely loved it. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like you said, it's mostly like deviant sexual stuff. And one of my first thoughts when I was done with the book was, did your mom or family members read this? If yes, what did they say?
So family members, yes. Mom, no, and I'll explain why. She turns 80 in December.
Okay.
Nicest woman you'd ever meet, but everybody in the world's kind, everybody's good. It's the way it should be. It's a great life.
Right.
But really, then she has no clue what happens in normal society, and I'm glad she doesn't. So we wanted the book, and I told her, Mom, this is a different book, right? It's a little extreme. And she said, Well, I read romance novels. I was like, This isn't a romance novel,
No,
Mom.
it's not.
And she likes that. So what I did is I'd sign mom a personal copy. It's still on her mantle, and I just told her you can never read it. So when I go visit her, I see it. I see it on the shelf. She's never read it, but she's got her copy, so she's happy. Now the rest of the family all read it. They loved it. Brothers, wife, in-laws, everybody loves it. Mom, I kept from reading it because again, it gets into that real dark part of society
Yes.
and it really walks you through from A to Z. I start the book off with a chapter called Name That Crime. And what I do is I take a booking photo or a crime scene photo, and then I give the reader three or four criminal statutes, and you kind of guess what that crime is,
That's
and then
right.
you read
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
So you get to kind of be your own profiler and see how close you get to that crime. And then the book, it amps up from there in the deviancy as you go through. The last chapter is a chapter called Teachable Tidbits. That's more of a fun chapter. kind of to let you down off that extreme read that you just got through. And those are things that your readers and listeners might incorporate into their own sex life. That isn't criminal, but these were all still police cases that I worked where I never thought that people would incorporate such items in their sex life. So I do a kind of a fun chapter at the end for the reader, and it's kind of up to them whether they would ever, try one of these things or not. But again, it's more of a fun chapter to end it.
Yeah, now you say sex is power. That's obvious, but can you explain it a little bit further?
The suspects I interviewed, I love to interview post or interrogations to kind of ask why they did it, like
Yeah.
get the background. It makes you a better cop for future investigations. So I would always dig deep into it very professionally, again, building rapport as to why they did it. It on these sex crimes, especially with serial killers, it always came back to not the physical act of the sex, came back to the power that they almost got high in their brains, euphoria in their
Mm.
brain, and it was the domination over the victim. And necrophilia is, post-mortem death with the victim. The reason why they would do that is because they would gain power over the victim again, even though they were dead. In their minds, they were dominating this individual, desecrating the body, and that really got them off on a high. Now, these are twisted individuals, so for your listeners, don't try and think this through with a normal brain because you never be able to. Their
Yeah.
brains are not normal. They act on a different wavelength than ours. But it was all about power, and I found that fascinating that because most people think it's biological, right? It's sex. That's why you're doing it. But it really wasn't for these individuals. It was pure power.
Wow. Now, thinking about all the bizarre stuff that I've seen and, reading your book, my mind goes to Michael Hutchins, the late lead singer of INXS, and David Carradine. What do they have in common? David Carradine for sure was the autoerotic of asphyxiation. How many cases of that did you investigate?
Boy, over my career, I'd say dozens. It happens
Really?
a lot. And
I
I was
only
just,
had one. I only had
yeah.
one.
Oh, yeah, we had it. I would say we probably have a little bit more in Alaska. Again, I think you get the dark climate, the cold,
Boy,
the alcohol and drug use. So we have a lot.
man.
Uh, they were always, I mean, fascinating cases. And the thing I found was the most heart-wrenching is the families. Unfortunately, the family would typically find the individual,
Oh,
not always,
yeah.
but a lot of the times.
Right.
And that was painful for them. And then the families would want it to be a homicide or it's accidental suicide. And you'd really have to explain to them that it wasn't any of those. It was autoerotic asphyxiation. And they didn't want to take that as a case, closing the case. They wanted it
Sure.
to be further investigated. I always felt for him because I get it. You don't ever want your family member to go through that, to die that way. So that was the most difficult conversations is with the family or friends or some neighbors to tell them this is actually what happened. It's not a suicide. It's not a homicide. They were gratifying themselves and accidentally, most of the times, uh, died of suffocation.
Yeah, I think about David Carradine. What a great career he had. First, he was Kwai Chang Caine, wandering around the desert looking for his brother in the Old West. And then later on, like Kill Bill,
Yep.
and then you wind up dead in a seedy hotel in Bangkok, Thailand, dressed in women's undergarments, choking yourself as you're masturbating. And I'm like, how do you go from point A to point Z like that? I don't get it. But
Yeah, that's something that he'd always been doing. That's not something that materializes late in life or at some point. He's probably done that hundreds of times. In all the cases I investigated, just so you know how it works is they'll typically take a nail or a pin, do a belt loop or a rope, tack it in a closet, up top. They'll lean forward as they're doing it, and it restricts oxygen as they lean forward. When they pass out, it'll break, all their weight will go, and that pin or nail will break loose, and they'll recover, they'll regain consciousness. What happens is oftentimes they put the pin in or the nail too far in, they'll fall forward and it doesn't release.
oh boy.
And then they in essence they die right there. They don't mean to, it's an accident, but they're passed out, they can't save themselves. That was always, but when I would look, there would be 15, 20, 30 nail holes. So they've done this that many times.
Oh, okay, okay. That
But
makes
it
sense.
had worked out. And so
Yeah,
carrying was different. His family also had an independent investigator. They believed that it was homicide. And again, they got the video, everything. He was the only one to enter the
yeah.
hotel we were staying at. So it wasn't a homicide. He died of autoerotic, which was
Yeah, yeah,
unfortunate. Not his
yeah,
first time.
that's a tough conversation with with loved ones. Oh my God. I mean, the only one that I had, this guy had a very complex like pulley system and a noose around his neck. He was sitting on the ground, and he also had, as the coup de grace, a D-cell battery with nipple clamps on his nipples. So he had
The
electrical
electric himself.
charge going from the battery to his nipples as he was doing this, as he was suffocating. And the ME came in. I said, "What do you think?" And she's like, "Either he had a heart attack while he was doing it, or or he suffocated. From the noose. It just things that pulley didn't do what he thought it was going to do. There was no safe exit from this. So
Yeah.
obviously every cop in the district wanted to see that one. You're just like, holy shit, you don't see that every day.
Yep, that goes back to the book is that it's those weird cases that cops in the community really want to know about.
Oh yeah.
And that's that thing right there. Yeah.
In reading your book or listening to your book, you explore bestiality, necrophilia, even necrophilia on dead animals. I didn't even know that was a thing. How prevalent is that in Anchorage?
Well, that's so back to your autoerotic, only one case I've ever worked, and
Okay.
this was a moose in Alaska.
Oh
The
my
moose,
God.
I don't know how the moose died, but it's a trail in Anchorage. We call it a coastal trail, so it's a nice, beautiful trail, heavily wooded, so not public, but close to housing. The moose had died somehow, and the neighbors, the smell of the moose, because decomposing, these are
Oh yeah.
1,600-pound animals. Yeah, that's a lot. So
Yeah, it is.
they called, and then they'd seen an individual building like a wall out of trees and things like that in front of this moose. So they were thinking that maybe they were harvesting the moose, taking the meat from him.
Yeah.
They called the cops. So a couple of my coworkers went out there and they saw this makeshift wall. But when he went up to look over it, the guy actually had his pants down and
Oh.
was engaging with this dead moose. The moose
Oh.
was half rotted too. So he couldn't believe he's like, it just blew his mind that this is actually going on a rotted corpse. But uh, interesting what depths people will go to. That's the only one I've been a part of in Anchorage. It happens all over the nation and the world, though, unfortunately.
My
Bestiality is
God.
another one that I find
Oh
extreme on those cases. But the necrophilia bestiality that's extremely uncommon, but happens.
my God. So your book, 50 Shades of True Crime, Sex, Drugs, and Killer Kink. How did you get that published? I mean, I'm sure that wasn't easy. You're pitching this book with this, this subject matter. It's like I said, it's not a Hallmark or a cozy mystery or something like that. How did you do it?
It was tough. So I wrote it in about 3 months post-retirement. Pretty easy because all these cases were burned into my brain. So you just kind of write them out. And I write it from the cop's perspective. So you really get A to Z on what happens and how police officers operate, how they investigate, what happened to these individuals, post arrest or death or whatever it was. You
Yeah,
get all of it in. And so I wrote it pretty raw, pretty to the point, all the facts, case facts. And then I thought this would be easy to get a publisher because it's such a unique true crime book. So I started pitching to the bigs one by one. They would interview me, they'd read the book, they'd be like, wow, there's a lot in this book. I don't know if the audiences are quite ready for this. How about you do this? Take this out, take this out. And I was like, well, if you take that out, I thought about it, but then it's not going to be the same. It's not
right.
going to be a sexual type book. So I'd go to three or four publishers, they'd think about it, sometimes taking weeks. They would send it up there, change the command. I would have Zoom meetings with them to say, again, they would go back to, we like this part, and this part, but take this out. Finally, I said, I'm not going to take anything out. I had almost given up because, I mean, how many publishers can you get a no from?
Right,
And then
exactly.
I went to another one about six or seven, and I can't even remember. And they said, we love it. Let's publish it. Let's run with it. Let's put it in all the formats. And then we were off and running. And, they help with editing and all that. So that process takes 3 or 4 months. It's
Yeah,
not quick back and forth. You do the title, you do the cover, all that. They obviously have heavy influence on that because they're the publisher.
right.
And then they get, podcasts, book signings, things like that. It's nice to be affiliated with them because they know how to sell books.
You know, I think about it and it's like that's a killer title. Did you come up with that or where did it come from?
The 50 Shades of True Crime is obviously a play off 50 Shades of Grey
Right.
because it's that sexual component, a hugely popular TV series and book series.
Yep.
So I'll give credit to the publisher on that. They
Okay.
helped me develop that name and then ran with it. And also the sex, drugs, and killer kink. Great subtitle because that's really what the book's about. It's got all
Absolutely.
those things throughout it and all true crime cases. So I give the publisher a lot of credit for the title. And it's worked out very well because I think people instantly know what the book's about just by the
Yep.
title.
Was there an original title that you wanted at first, like when you were writing it?
It was so dumb I can't even give
Come
it out to you.
on. Come
That's how
on.
bad it was.
Come on. I want to
No,
hear it.
it was cucumbers, cough drops, pizza, or pigs. Why your life is perfectly normal, and all those things are incorporated in the book as sexual things.
Yes, they
That
are.
that's an extreme title, and while I thought it sounded good, it was that in retrospect it was not good.
Well,
So again, the pub really helped me out with the 50 Shades of True Crime. Much better
yes.
title, and
Yeah.
that's why you have experts.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah. Yeah.
But if your listeners want to learn about cucumbers, cough drops, pizza, and pigs, that's the book for them.
Yeah. I have a Facebook group called Cops and Writers, and Karina Alice asked for, I posted that I was going to be doing this interview, and she said, "Did sex crimes become more seasonal based on weather?"
Well, I'd have to say yes. I'd say the majority of the real deviant crimes, probably wintertime,
Okay.
the darkness, the cold. Not always. I mean, you always have that subset of
Sure,
crimes,
sure.
but I'd say yeah, there was more of it. And again, you're closing these houses, apartments,
Yeah.
a lot of depression in Alaska. So I think that's when it hits people, and so they become more violent, or if they have tendencies towards that, they act out on those crimes. So I'd say winter.
Okay. And she also asked, more or less, what's the lowest temp that you found a couple engaged in the act, like in the car or wherever?
Cars all the time. It could be 20 below because the car's heated. So we get
Okay.
that a lot. We
How about
follow up on them and
outside?
they're it's like outside we've caught individuals in the wintertime having sex. I
Oh,
would say above freezing, like cold, but not 20 or 30 below.
okay.
That's in 20 to 30 below, which is for Anchorage is rare because it's on the inlet, but it still gets there sometimes. So I'd say above freezing, uh, probably, we've caught them, but not below it. That'd be hard to do.
Yeah. Biologically, I don't think it would work,
Yeah,
but
it'd be tough.
it would. Oh my. So what's next? Another book, same topic, something different? What's next?
Yeah, probably the second book was going to be something different. What's unique in this one is I did my very first podcast with some retired FBI agents, and then I was called by a Hollywood production company after that had listened to the podcast. One of their team members actually puts together the podcast called
Yeah.
Cold Red, and they said we'd like to do a docuseries. And I was a little bit taken aback. So what they did is they signed me on a 12-month contract
Yeah.
to kind of develop this to get a buyer. Again, the docuseries would be sold to Netflix, Hulu, Discovery. They've got to make the deal with one of these streaming services. Then they get a budget. Then they put this docuseries together. So I'm so hopeful for that. That's in the works now. They
Sweet.
kind of own the rights to that temporarily.
Yeah.
They have a year to do it, which will be February. So I'd certainly like to write another book, but let's see how this docuseries develops initially. If that's a go, that'd be a fun project to do as well.
Absolutely. We could all say we knew you when, before you become a huge producer, writer, or whatever. So that's awesome. And you also
Yeah.
have a wine hobby, if I remember correctly from the book.
Yeah, we did. We owned a wine store in Anchorage for
Hmm.
12 and a half years, the wife and I. So we were the largest wine distributors in Alaska for that time. So I always joked about it because I had liquor and law enforcement in my career fields. I was always going to be employed because neither of those are ever going anywhere.
Well, that's for sure.
But
Yes.
we love wine. We name our dogs after grapes. Malbec was our latest dog, and so it was a passion of ours. So we turned it into business. Extremely successful in the Anchorage area, and then we sold that business just a year or two before I retired. That was always the plan, so we could travel
Okay.
more.
Yeah.
But absolutely loved it. I was the only cop in the state of Alaska with a package store liquor license, so that was unique. The department
Wow.
really pushed back on me and said you can't do it, but in our
Right.
policies and procedures, it didn't prevent it. So I really pushed back on them, and then was able to get it and open the store and operate it successfully for more than a decade.
Okay, I love, and I mean love, a good dry champagne. Bollinger is my favorite. If I have the money, I'll splurge on a good bottle of Bollinger. Now, best bang for your buck. What's the best like dry champagne out there? What do you think?
Boy, yeah, champagne's bang for your buck. You get the Doms, things like that. They're 300 or 400 bucks spendy.
Right.
My dad we used to drink a lot of Mums when I was younger. Mums is a mid-range, not overly good.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's a nice one if you have a party. I tell you what's not technically champagne, but Prosecco is a great if you have a party
Too
and you
sweet.
want to be too sweet for you,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
economic. It's
Or,
pretty
or
inexpensive.
sparkling wine. I
So
know
good
champagne is, technically from, Champagne,
for
France,
friends.
but
Yep.
a sparkling wine. I like Schramsberg. I do like the different
Yep.
Schramsbergs. Is there any other that you could point out?
Let's see. Boy, there's a ton of them out there. The Dom is one of my favorites, but again, it's expensive. I don't
Yes, it
the
is.
mid-level ones are tough for me to get because champagnes that come from France are they're just going to be spendy. They're going to
Sure.
upwards of $100. I do like, you get into reds. Pinot Noir is my favorite grape on planet Earth.
Oh,
Like
okay.
heavy to that. So I'm definitely more of a red guy than champagne or white. But I
Okay.
don't have a glass of champagne to start, but then I'm immediately moving into red wine.
Okay. What's your favorite Pinot Noir?
It's called William Sellium, and they're out of Sonoma, California.
Okay.
It's absolutely unbelievable. Very fruit forward, traditional. It's one of the best winemaker facility grapes I've ever had that where they grow their Pinots there. And I've tried Pinot Noirs all over the world, but I think Sonoma, boy, they're hard to beat.
Okay. Very cool. All right. Let's wind this down. Where can people go to find out more about you and your book?
Yep. Well, this is the book, 50 Shades of True Crime, and you can buy it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, in store, online. It's audiobook, Kindle, paperback, hardback, whatever you like to listen to or read. It's available. Amazon's probably the easiest. If you want to watch the book trailer, which is kind of cool, you can go to dougfifer.com. That's just DOUGFIFER.com. Watch the book trailer. All the links to buy it are on that website as well. And if you have any questions about the books, I always answer any reader that sends me a question. I do a lot of book clubs that feature my book and then go online or in person and present and answer more questions. So check it out on my website, see if you like it, order the book, read it. I think your readers will find it quite different than normal true crime, but also very enlightening on what happens in everyday USA.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job with it. I really enjoyed it. I'm not just saying that because you're on my show. It passed the parking lot test. If you listen to my show, it's like if I'm going to the gym or the grocery store or wherever, I'm stuck in the parking lot and I don't get out of my car because I want to keep listening. Yeah,
That's
so
cool.
it definitely passed that test, and it's a great book. I highly, highly recommend it. So, hey, thank you so much for your time today, Doug. This has been a great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for having me and thanks for the compliment of the book. I appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for joining me and best-selling author and retired Anchorage police officer Doug Fifer. Doug, thanks for filling us in on the unusual behaviors and challenges Alaskan coppers face on the job in the land of the midnight sun. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Cops and Writers podcast. If you haven't done so yet, can you take a minute and rate and review the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? If you have already, thank you. As always, thank you for all of your support, and of course, let's be careful out there.